Hey, Arpin, how you doing?
I'm good, buddy. It's Friday.
I know. Thank God it's Friday.
Yeah, we get to talk.
That's awesome. Let's talk. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the BasuandGodin Notebook on this Friday, May 30th. Got a lot of little news to go through because it's a weird time of the year. There's not a lot of pure hardcore news going on, especially not around the Canadiens, but it's clearly gossip season. So there's going to be gossip stuff that we're going to go through today. But there's at both ends of the show, there's going to be some hard news because we talked about Mathieu Darche and the New York Islanders and its potential impact on the Montreal Canadiens in a previous episode. He had his press conference on Thursday, introductory press conference. And we'll finish with another piece of news. Our colleague François Gagnon was named as the recipient of the Elmer Ferguson Award, which recognizes a member. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So it recognizes a member of the media for his or her accomplishments in hockey by the Hall of Fame. So it's pretty significant.
Media. Print media specified, yes.
Print media, indeed. Yeah. So we'll touch on that. All right. And in between connections, that there's Rocket stuff going on. Players interested in coming to Montreal or not. That's we'll go through each of those items, but I want to start with just picking up on our discussion on Mathieu Darche and the Islanders because our position and our argument was that this was a team that was in a prime position to be to discuss with the Montreal Canadiens potentially for trades because of their situation. They're at a crossroads as an organization, but you listen to Mathieu Darche, and he said how he thought that the New York Islanders could have been a playoff team, should have been a playoff team, and he thinks that in the future they're going to be good enough to be a playoff team. And he's got one of the owners, John Collins, who was right next to him, and who was talking about how it was important to cultivate the connection with the community and increase revenues and all that. It doesn't look like a team who's going to be ready to start a rebuild and look at the Montreal Canadiens and say, you've got the stuff that we want.
Yeah, big time. And so when John Collins said in the press conference, had Darche had told him, my goal is for you to make money so that I can spend that money. That money comes from playoff revenue. And Darche seemingly being pretty adamant about wanting the Islanders to be in the playoffs. And then today, signing Kyle Palmieri to a 2-year contract, I believe
$4.75 million.
$4.75 million a year with a no trade clause attached to it. That is not the type of signing you make when you think that you're ready to go into a semi-refresh, retool, what have you. That's the kind of signing you make when you are looking to bolster your team and don't really have much concern for making space for younger players or what have you.
But what if this was a deal that was agreed upon by Lou?
Well, it sounds like it was. It sounds like it was, but I would think that, I would think that Darche would be given some leeway to put his own stamp on that trade, right? Or that deal. Whether it was agreed to, like the no trade clause, for instance, I think it would be reasonable for Darche to walk in and say, listen, I understand you had an agreement in principle with the previous general manager. The one amendment I would like to make, whether you're willing to or not, is I would like to take the no trade clause off the books. But he didn't do that. Regardless of that, it speaks to really ownership. Like if ownership signed off on that, that's a sign that, they want to go forward with this group.
Yeah.
It would not be cohesive to sign Palmieri to a 2-year contract at age 34 and trade a 30-year-old Bo Horvat who has so many years left on his contract. Like, it just doesn't seem to be two things that the same team would do and have it make sense. You know, Palmieri is still an effective hockey player. You know, he's not in his prime, but you know, he finished third on the team in scoring, had 24 goals. He's one of their top forwards, you know, and so whether that's a good thing or the bad thing for the Islanders is up for debate. But what seems clear, the message that sends to me is they're not ready to start retooling this team.
Yeah.
The wisdom of that is for us to determine, I guess. I would want to retool the team. I think I see a lot of ages that start with the number 3 when I'm looking at their roster. And I don't see a path to this team being competitive for a Stanley Cup as currently constituted. So I would want to engage in some form of refresh, but clearly Mathieu Dash is not looking to do that based not only on what he said at the press conference about the playoffs and what have you, but this contract, which I agree with you, is typical Lou Lamoriello handshake deal. We'll announce it when it's convenient to us. You don't say anything or else my henchman will come after you, kind of thing. You know, like he does that stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So there'd be no surprise in that. But, you know, the same organization that, you know, traded away Brock Nelson for a haul that included a great prospect in Cal Ritchie and picks, you know, it seemed to be gearing towards that path. And like, you know, for instance, like I wouldn't be surprised if Mathieu Dash looked to trade Jean-Gabriel Pajot, for example, but it's not. Bo Horvat is the leading scorer on this team. He's the leader on the team. He's arguably their best player.
Yeah.
And so you can't come out and the first time you speak to your team's fans and talk about making the playoffs and then trade away your best player. Well, the best player would be Sorokin probably, but your second best player, you know, it's like, it just wouldn't make sense. So I think that might be, you know, we mentioned 3 teams that the Canadiens could potentially do business with, and there's surely others, but the ones that seem the most obvious or fit this category of team being Pittsburgh, Boston, and the Islanders, I think seems kind of clear that the Islanders are not in that category, at least not yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's, even though there's nothing confirmed there, for now we're going to erase the name of Bo Horvat. I think that this is, for Montreal, I think that to a certain extent, Noah Dobson could have made sense. Ryan Pollock could have made sense too. So, yeah. But anyway,
Pollock on the other hand, I would not fall out of my chair if they traded him.
Yeah.
Like, that's not inconceivable. That can still be coherent messaging if you get a decent return for Pollock, and get someone, a younger but NHL ready and NHL, you know, strong defenseman, who makes you maybe slightly worse in the short term, but good for the long term. You know, Pollock has 4 years left on his contract. It's not the same as Horvat. I could see him justifying a Pollock trade only because, you know, the defense, they need to do something. Like Pollock, Pelech, and Mayfield are all signed long term. It's, you know, they re-signed Adam Boqvist today.
Yeah. Which
doesn't really move the needle one way or the other. They do have to sign Romanov in addition to Dobson. But yeah, I think Pollock is still maybe a possibility if that interests the Canadiens, but it's definitely not the same type of trade. It's not the same caliber of trade, but
it's 5 years. It's 5 years left at $6.15 million. So it's not a cheap ticket, and it's not necessarily. I mean, he's a good defenseman, but he doesn't move the needle in the way that Horvat would, or obviously Dobson would. Even though I never thought for a second that Dobson would leave Long Island. I may be wrong on that, but
I'd be shocked.
I'd be shocked too.
Yeah.
Okay, so on the other end, you've got guys, two wingers that made the news this week through different channels. We had our colleague from Daily Faceoff, Frank Saravalli, who said that Jonathan Marchessault was open to be traded, and that in that sense, the Canadiens were sort of a favorite to land him. I know that Marchessault went on the Poche Bleu podcast with Maxime Lapierre, and he said, "I'm still happy with the decision I made a year ago, but Montreal definitely is a special place in my heart. You never know what the future holds, but right now we'll see what happens. I'm very happy with Nashville, the organization, and the city where we're staying. Things haven't gone our way this year, but as I said to Barry Trotz, sometimes you got to take a step back to take 2 steps forward." It seems weird. I would understand. I mean, I remember clearly how disgruntled he was with the way things were going for the Predators when they came to Montreal. So I could understand that he would seek a different opportunity for himself at this point, because the Preds are a bit stuck in their own way. But from the Montreal Canadiens standpoint, if they were not interested in signing him for more than 2 or 3 years last summer, how is he more attractive after a down season and having still, 4 years left on his deal?
Yeah, he doesn't. It doesn't make any sense for the Canadiens to be suddenly interested in giving term that they were not willing to give last year. And I think Kent Hughes was pretty, I mean, it's the one time he's specifically talked about contract negotiations, was last year on free agency day when, Marchessault himself said that Montreal was in it. So Hughes felt comfortable explaining the circumstances and flat out said we offered him a higher AAV with less term. And so therefore less total money. And Marchessault took the term and the total money, and the Canadiens were not willing to go to that term a year ago. I see no reason why suddenly they would be willing to go to that term. It just makes no sense. It wouldn't make any sense. So I can understand Marchessault wanting, and he even said it after he signed that the Montreal offer was very, very tempting at the time, and he considered taking it, and it was hard not to for him. But it's, if anything, how the season went in Nashville for Marchessault, I mean, the Canadiens could write that off as being the whole team underperformed and it was a bad environment, blah, blah, blah. And listen, Marchessault's comments about Andrew Brunette at the end of the season caused quite a ripple in Nashville, talking about his system and how these adjustments, and we didn't adjust during the season. He openly criticized the way the Predators play under Brunette at the end of the season, and it caused quite a ripple in Nashville. So that makes it understandable why he'd be open to a change in scenery. Obviously, Montreal was in there last year, but yeah, the circumstances around Montreal, what's the primary reason they went and got Patrick Laine? Was the 2 years left on his contract. That was the number one factor for Montreal to even consider adding Patrick Laine, was the fact that he had 2 years left on his contract. It was the perfect amount of time for Montreal. Marchessault having 4 years left at a reasonable cap number, but I just don't see.
He's still a 5'9" winger who's 34 years old.
Still a 5'9" winger who's 34 years old. He's like a relatively young 34 though. Like he doesn't have the regular NHL wear that a normal 34-year-old would, even though he was grinding in the minors and what have you. It took him a while to get to the NHL, but still. But yeah, that's what he is. And the Canadiens already have a 5'9" winger. If he's even 5'9". But
they got a couple. They got a couple of 5'9" wingers actually. Yeah. But don't forget Galley. So
don't forget, Galley. Right? I mean, I'm talking about in your top 6, right? You're not
right.
You're not adding Marchessault to play him on the third line, and the Canadiens, frankly, probably have too many bottom sixers at this point. But it's the reality for the Canadiens, and this is why it more or less made sense. I think the Canadiens saw Marchessault as a way to be competitive as a bridge player. And the Canadiens, we've talked about it. There's numerous bridge players. Like the Sam Montembeault's contract was a bridge contract, where if he can prove and get himself another contract after, great. But basically, bridge them to a time when one of Primo, Dobish, or Fowler are ready to be a number one goalie in the NHL. Marchessault was, I think, seen as a bridge to their young players taking over. I don't see why that would have changed. There's no reason for that to have changed. There's no reason for the Canadiens to suddenly think, yes, we should have 2 5'9" wingers in our top 6 for the next 4 years and hope to have success in the Stanley Cup playoffs. When Jonathan Marchessault is a gamer, and I'm not saying he's not a playoff player, he's the opposite.
His compete level is off the charts. That way, I'm going to give 100%. That to him. Gosh.
Oh yeah, of course, and no one could take that away from him whatsoever. There's no chance that you could take that away from him. That's just a fact. Anyone who's seen him play in the playoffs knows the level of competitiveness this guy brings. But this reality for the Canadiens, if you look at, right now they have 4 players they know are going to be in their top 6 for a long time, right? Slav, Caulfield, Suzuki, Demidov. Of those 4, only Slav is a bigger guy. Suzuki's not small, but he's not huge either. He's like an average size forward. Super strong. We could go on and on about why Suzuki plays bigger than he is, but the fact is that he's 6 foot, 210, whatever. Like, he's not a big guy, not a bigger guy. Demidov, not small again, but not big. And Caulfield, who's just flat out small. So that's half your top 6 right there. You balance that out with Slav, and that's a big reason why they drafted Slav, is that that's a luxury to have a guy his size with his strength and his skill in your top 6. A big draw for getting Doc was that a big, skilled, competitive guy in your top 6 is a plus. Whether he can be that still remains to be seen. I don't think it's a write-off that he will never be that. He could be that for them. But yeah, that's, those other 3 spots in their top 6 has to balance out the lack of size of the 3 other guys that are mainstays in their top 6. It's not that they're in their top 6 right now and that might change. It's not going to change for a long time. Like, it's really,
no, that's it.
It's really a semi-permanent thing. So, they need to offset that with the other guys in their top 6, which is why, as competitive as Marchessault is, it doesn't help offset that.
No, but I think that let's assume that Frank was right in his reporting. I think it's always attractive when you know that a player would like to come to Montreal, and it's been an issue to draw interest. And in the past, it seemed as though a lot of players didn't see coming to the Montreal, the Canadiens, as a positive development in their career. They were a bit rebuffed by the market a little bit. If you have a player who's interested, it's always attractive. It should pique your interest, but that to me that ship has sailed a little bit. And the fact that they traded for Patrick Laine after, obviously the Canadiens wanted to look at a way of adding some more goals last year.
Yeah.
And in the short term. So Marchessault was a way to do that. Didn't work out. They turned around. They traded for Laine. You could argue maybe that the Islanders re-signing Palmieri because they know that they're so starved for goals that they've got one guy there they can sign for sure at a decent ticket, at a decent price. Why not lock him up? But anyway, that's a different debate. But when I look at Marchessault, I say, okay, that's one thing that he would be interested in coming to Montreal. although he hasn't spoken that way earlier in his career, but it just doesn't make sense for Montreal. From their standpoint, it's like, okay, you've chosen Nashville, now we got to move on and go somewhere else.
Yeah. Just to reinforce the point, though, Marchessault had 5 playoff years with Vegas. 6, all but 1 year where he made the playoffs. 21 points in 20 games, 6 points in 7 games, 10 points in 20 games, 9 in 19, then 25 in 22 games, and 4 in 7 games. So this guy clearly is the exception to what seems to be a growing rule where you do need size to get through the grind of the playoffs and be effective throughout. It doesn't necessarily apply to him, but yeah, I think it would be strange for the Canadiens to draw a line in the sand last year and erase that line 1 year later when their young players are 1 year closer to maturity and seemingly 1 year closer to integrating the lineup and taking up a spot that Marchessault would conceivably be holding. So yeah.
Plus, you would have to give some assets, interesting assets, to acquire him. So it's not as if he'd be given to you for free. So
no, far from it. And that would be a complicated trade to pull off because I don't know the extent to which Barry Trotz is prepared to burn it all down. They're oddly in a similar spot to the Islanders, that they have an older team, a lot of guys in their 30s. Obviously, after adding Marchessault, Stamkos, and Brady Shea a year ago, and Brian O'Reilly not long before that, a year before that, they became an older team that expects to win now. So yeah, it would be a complicated trade to pull off because I'm sure Barry Trotz would want a player who could replace Marchessault in return. And I don't know if the Canadiens have that to offer them, frankly.
No. Another player who has a reported interest in Montreal is Nikolaj Ehlers. Now, Nikolaj Ehlers is a Danish player, and a fellow Dane, Jannik Hansen, was on Sportsnet the other day, Sportsnet Radio, and he said
he's a regular contributor. He's a regular contributor on the Sportsnet Vancouver affiliate.
Yeah, so he was asked about Ehlers potentially signing with the Canucks, and he said he would pick Montreal before here. He's great friends with Laine. He played out in the Q back in juniors, so he's familiar with that. He wouldn't scoff that plane in Canada. He likes that pressure, so that's not an issue. That's interesting. Yeah, that connection with Laine obviously goes back to their playing days together in Winnipeg. Mm-hmm. Maybe before that, I don't know, but I would assume that at least it goes back to there. And now Ehlers, who had an unusually strong playoff run with the Jets this time around, is about to become a free agent. He's 29 years old, and that's another winger there for you. Plays on both on the right wing and left wing, and he's probably going to be one of the more attractive wingers on the market. Certainly going to get north of $7.5 or $8 million a year, but I've always thought that this guy, I look at this player and the level of skill is just off the charts.
Yeah.
He's really, really skilled guy and a difference maker, but I just don't understand why over the course of his career in Winnipeg, he was not able to have an overall bigger impact than he did. Of course, he's been injury prone, so that's been the main knock on him, is that more or less you feel as though every year is going to miss 20 games. And that in itself should be a red flag for any team wanting to sign this guy long term. But the the skill level is not in question here, but do you think that it makes sense for the Canadiens to go after Ehlers should he choose to test free agency instead of signing with the Jets again?
I mean, he's a talented player. But again, not to beat a dead horse, but Ehlers might be 6 feet. Might be. It's listed as 6 feet. He's a $170 soaking wet. That's not a large man. He's been pretty stringy kind of his whole career. The one thing that I think is a bit of it might be a reason why Ehlers would be tempted to leave Winnipeg is you look at the distribution of even strength ice time in Winnipeg this year. Nikolaj Ehlers among forwards was 8th in average even strength ice time per game.
Wow.
An average of 13-14 a game at 5-on-5. That's below Adam Lowry, Cole Perfetti, Nino Niederreiter, Mason Appleton, Gabe Vilardi, Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele. That's far down the pecking order. And if you're paying a guy $7 million when he's essentially getting more or less third line minutes, and I think the situation is unique in Winnipeg just because the Lowry line is technically their third line, but they get a lot of minutes. They get more minutes and more significant minutes than your typical third line. But still, that's his reality. That's in Winnipeg, and so why is that?
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing I would wonder. But I mean, primarily, the same things we said about Marchessault apply to Ehlers, and by the way, that wasn't just it's a bit of a one-off. Last year he was 5th among forwards in even strength ice time, just a shade above Lowry, above Monahan even in the brief time he was in Winnipeg, above Niederreiter, above Toffoli after he came over. So yeah, it dipped this year under Scott Arniel. And maybe that's a source of discontent, or maybe that's a reflection of how Arniel saw his two-way game. But it doesn't make sense because, again, I remain convinced that the Canadiens feel they need to fill out their top 6 with bigger guys. And it might be a little simplistic, or it might sound old-fashioned, or what have you. But the Canadiens have been pretty transparent about the fact that they're trying to build a team that's going to have success in the playoffs. And you can't have a top 6 full of guys who don't weigh a whole lot. It just doesn't seem to lead to playoff success. So we mentioned Marchessault's playoff history. So this year, Nikolaj Ehlers had 5 goals in 8 games, 7 points. He had reached the playoffs in Winnipeg 6 times previously. 7 assists, no goals in 15 games, his first time in 2018. 0 goals, 0 assists in 6 games. 2 goals, no assists in 4 games. 2 goals, 1 assist in 6 games. 1 game played, no points. Last year was 5 games, 2 assists, no goals. So he scored more goals in the playoffs this year than he had in the previous 6 playoff trips combined with Winnipeg, in which he scored 4 goals total in 30, 35, 36-ish games. So I don't know. There's not much of a track record of playoff success there to go on when considering giving him a long-term lucrative contract.
And if the connection is Patrick Laine, well, Patrick Laine is arriving at the last year of his deal. So it's not the time to make some long-term plans with this guy.
No. And frankly, if there's a team out there who strikes out on adding offense, heck, would it be crazy for Winnipeg to think like, we'll take a year of Laine? I know with all the history there, it might be really iffy, but if Ehlers leaves and they need a power play guy who doesn't play a whole lot at even strength, who better to replace Ehlers than 1 year of Patrick Laine? Ask the Canadiens to eat a bit of money and work out a deal for a temporary solution to that hole. It'll actually make a ton of sense. So, other than the whole Winnipeg thing, which I don't know if that would be a hindrance, and I don't know if Patrick Laine would waive to go there, because remember he had to waive his no trade clause to come to Montreal. But if anything, I would think that Laine would be a candidate to replace Ehlers more so than a candidate to play with him in Montreal, because it's this. I can't see his time in Montreal going beyond this season if it even gets that far.
Yeah. Okay, so that's no balls, two strikes so far. At least, but at least
we're pretty lame, eh? We're just like lame rumor mongers. In terms of rumor mongering,
well, the thing is, there's no point.
Lame ones.
There's no point in feeding the rumor mill and nurturing ideas that ultimately we think don't make sense. You know, I think it's a responsibility to look at it from a cold and methodical standpoint and say, well, here's the lowdown on this situation.
I get it. That's our brand, but I'm just saying we just keep shooting down these rumors when everyone's having fun with them. It's our brand can be lame. That's all. That's all I'm saying. It can be.
Our brand can be lame. That's good. I'll buy you a t-shirt.
That should be, it should be our new.
Our brand can be lame.
Yeah, let's get a jingle for that.
Let's try something different here. Jonathan Toews, attempting a comeback at 37 years old. Our buddy Pierre mentioned that. That Toews reached out to Pat Brisson, told him that he was fully committed to coming back to play next season, and Pierre Lebrun says that Brisson will start taking calls from teams now leading up to July 1st. So Toews has not played since April of 2023. Mm-hmm. Illustrious career. The ending is tainted by a certain scandal, but at the same time, you look at Quenneville eventually got back into the NHL. So did Stan Bowman. So at 37 years old, there'll be no shortage of interest towards Toews. The sort of place that a team could find for him, I suppose, will be like a very wide spectrum. Probably some teams might bank on him more than others who would see him more as a complementary player at this point in his career. Mm-hmm. I don't know if money will be a factor, if him going to play in a certain market is going to be more significant or important to him. But if we just entertain the possibility of him as a short-term solution at center, do you think he makes sense for the Canadiens?
The question I would ask you is, do the Canadiens make sense to him? You look at the number of teams that are looking for a second-line center. We don't know what John Tavares is going to do in Toronto or what they're going to do with him. Sounds like he would like to come back. It sounds like they would want to bring him back. If they don't, that's one team. But really, you look at Colorado, you look at Winnipeg again, Vancouver, Calgary, Montreal. If Minnesota trades Marco Rossi, which it sounds like they will, and we could talk about him for a second, but again, it would be very similar to the Marchessault and Ehlers conversations in terms of the Canadiens' interest. Same thing.
Yeah, we didn't bring up Marco Rossi in our first conversation. Some people wrote to us, say, "How come you didn't mention Marco Rossi?" Well, that was a size
5'9". And so you look at the options that should be available or could be available, let's say, to Jonathan Toews, and Winnipeg is where he's from. That would be a wonderful story for him to be able to finish his career playing at home. They have a definite hole. They're a competitive team. They have a chance to win. It's teams that have an immediate chance to win are the ones that would make sense to Jonathan Toews, more so than teams trying to see if Jonathan Toews makes sense for them. I think Toews is in a position where he can be selective and go to a team where he has a chance to win in relative short order. Winnipeg would have another sentimental attachment to it of some sorts. He's a proud Winnipeg native. His French roots in the city proud of that too. Always makes an effort to speak French whenever the French media are around. Um, but if he doesn't find a fit on a team that he thinks can win, he could also just be like, okay, that's fine. I don't have to play. But so that's my first thought. Like, does Montreal make sense to Jonathan Toews? If he considers that Montreal does make sense to Jonathan Toews, maybe in part because of that pride in his French background, that might play a role in the sentimentality of playing in Montreal. Yeah, I don't see why they wouldn't give it a shot. It'd be somewhat similar to the Laine acquisition. Like Toews is 37. Obviously, his history is vastly different than Laine's history, but he hasn't played in 2 years. Who knows at what level he can still play at? He seems refreshed and everything. Like it's and had a very, very, very difficult battle with long COVID that really messed him up significantly. Did some holistic healing, went to India, did all sorts. He's had a very, very interesting man, Jonathan Toews. He's a very interesting view on things. I enjoy talking to him. It would be great from a journalist point of view to have him around to banter with. But I don't see a reality where Jonathan Toews is coming back to play on a team that's coming out of a rebuild, looking to enter the competitive mix. Look, it just doesn't seem like the ideal profile of a team for him, when I'm sure Winnipeg will reach out. I'm sure Colorado will reach out. I would be surprised if teams like Vancouver or Calgary didn't reach out. And there are others. There are other teams looking for a 2C. And I think among all those teams, I would find it surprising if Jonathan Toews looked at Montreal and said, that's the situation that's best for me right now.
Yeah, because I mean the size, the extent of the role that he could get is not equivalent to the chance of winning. Like there are plenty of teams that would want a second line center, but nobody's sure if he's still able to fit that role. Whereas if you're looking at a guy who could be your third line center, because at least you've got some other possible options at 2C. And that's where I think Winnipeg and Colorado become very, very interesting. You could add in maybe the New York Rangers to that mix too. Then you open yourself up to a possibility where maybe they could pleasantly surprise us with his level of play, but he won't hurt us if he's our third line center. And right. We have a team that's already competitive. So from that standpoint, I don't think that Montreal has enough to show for and enough to attract him compared to those other teams. So, and we don't know.
And I don't think Montreal, Montreal does not have a contingency plan if Jonathan Toews is actually a third line center at this point in his career. Whereas other teams might be able to absorb the reality that Jonathan Toews is not a second line center anymore, or let alone a first line center like he was for the vast majority of his career. I think there are teams that could withstand that. There are teams where his importance to the success of any second line is not as great as it would be elsewhere. Winnipeg and Colorado being the two primary examples there. I think on many levels, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for either party here to get a match, but I'd be willing to bet that one of Ken Hughes or Jeff Gordon has already reached out to Pat Brisson to find that out, to see if that's a possibility.
Yeah. But I mean, I look at Gabriel Landeskog, who did not play for 3 years, came back in the playoffs and was so energized and was really, not only did he follow the play properly, but he was heavily involved and he was impactful in the way that he was playing, which it blows my mind. But the fact that he's able to do that after not playing for 3 years, granted, he's younger than Toews. Toews 37, Landeskog 32.
Yeah.
And the last time that Landeskog played in 2022, he was still more than a point per game guy, which Toews has ceased to be. Even though he was never really about the points, Jonathan Toews, but
No, but he was never about the points. He was about his two-way play. I'm just looking at his last season in Chicago, 2022-23. On ice numbers do not paint a pretty picture. You know, it's really that team was obviously atrocious. So there's some context there, but that was his worst Corsi percentage of his career, worst goals for percentage by far of his career. The Blackhawks were outscored 42-20 with Jonathan Toews on the ice at 5-on-5 that year. Which, fine, the team was terrible, but even on that team, that number came in at very low. I'm just trying to find it here. It's 30th on the team in goals for percentage.
Wow.
I would imagine that there was difficult matchups there, but still, expected goals for percentage that year.
Difficult teammates too.
Yeah, difficult. Yeah, well, that's difficult teammates too. Exactly. And Toews was 29th on the team that year in expected goals for percentage, and actually is very, somewhat similar to. I mean, he was 38.45%. So all of those numbers were the worst of his career. By a very strong margin. Well, actually, the expected goals number, was much, much worse than the year prior. The goals for percentage number was much worse. I mean, the year prior in 21-22, the Blackhawks were outscored 45-41 at 5-on-5 with Toews on the ice, and that went to 42-20 a year later. So, but it's, he was going through. He was still trying to navigate a lot of things health-wise at the time, which could be an explanation and why he stepped away. Those seem to be a thing of the past, so maybe that's and it should be noted that the percentages totally didn't go in his favor. Blackhawks couldn't get a save; they couldn't get a goal to save their life with him on the ice, and that could be just a matter of random noise on a bad team. But yeah, to go from that to say that he's going to be a second line center for the Colorado Avalanche or the Winnipeg Jets might be a bit of a stretch. And that's the one thing where it would be probably less of a stretch for the Canadiens. And so maybe that's the one thing that the Canadiens could offer is like, we have a hole here. We're willing to give you a lot of runway to be our second line center. If it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world, but that would probably involve a 1-year contract, which I would imagine is what he's going to get regardless. So,
yeah, I just like the idea of reconnecting him and Kirby Dach. I like that idea.
Yeah. Well, Doc's a big fan.
Mm-hmm.
I remember talking to him after Toews' final game of that season. I guess that was the last year of his contract, right, with Chicago. So, and he watched that game. I talked to him the next day. It was, it was right at the end of the season. And, he got a little choked up. He got emotional watching it. It was, Jonathan Toews is a very important person to Kirby Dach for sure. And so, yeah, that's a good point that the residual benefit for Kirby Dach might be significant being reunited with Jonathan Toews. It's an excellent point.
All right. Well, we'll see in the coming weeks which direction this takes. Shall we move to the American League? Because the Laval Rocket trails to the Charlotte Checkers 2-0 in their series, the Eastern Conference Final. I mean, we were both sitting next to each other for the first game at the Place Belle for the first game of that series yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't go much better. It looks as though this young team starts to run out of gas a little bit, and I don't know if it's just physically, but mentally, they've really been pushed around, and their poise has been put to the test. It's been 3 games in the last 4 where their frustration really takes the better of them towards the end of the game, and there seems to be always a tipping point in the game that comes at different stages where they just lose it, and they've got this inability to come back, which had been throughout the season a very a particular trait of their team is their ability after a bad performance to bounce back and show up for the next game. It did not happen on Thursday night, and I don't know if it's just because they're banged up. They've got some guys, obviously with two regular defensemen. Laurent Dauphin, always a bit of a question mark. He left the game yesterday after a collision against the boards. He was hit hard. And obviously a bunch of guys are playing through certain things, but I don't keep my hopes high that they're going to be able to bounce back in this series. I don't know about you, but
No, I mean, I would listen. I think this is an interesting test. I mean, this is um, a good gauge for the evaluators in the Canadiens front office to look at their young players and see what they're made of. Going on the road to play 3 straight games, you're down 2-0. You got to win 2 of those games to stay alive. Like these are adverse conditions, and this is what the Canadiens wanted out of this Laval playoff run. Is that for their young players to face adverse conditions? They got some adversity in the Rochester series, came through big time in a deciding game situation, so that was a positive experience for their young players. You look at Charlotte, and I was sitting there, I think all night on Wednesday night during game 1. I'm watching these guys, and I'm looking them up on HockeyDB one by one. I'm like, who's this guy? Where's he from? What is this guy? What's this guy's story? Like, it fascinates me, like these guys, it's a no-name group, like it's, you were mentioning Justin Sourdif as like the one guy who's like kind of a Panthers prospect. And sure, he is.
I didn't realize that he was already 24. I thought he was still like 21 or 22.
Well, he's 23, I think. Yeah, he just turned 23 at the end of March. So it's not, but 5'11", 180, has played 4 games with the Panthers so far, had 34 points in 43 games, which is pretty good in the AHL. But still, it's not a team brimming with NHL talent. Jesse Puljujarvi's on the team. He plays on their 4th line. He's 27 at this point, I believe. Does not look like a particularly impactful AHL player. Tobias Bjornfot, who's previously a first-round pick, has been claimed on waivers twice since then. A guy like Ben Steeves, who's an undrafted sort of free agent. Like, there's so many. This is what I find strange is like there's so many of these like kind of undrafted free agents on the team, because when you're a team like Florida, like that's what you have to do, right? You got to try and find these guys that slip through the cracks and take a chance on them, like some undersized guys that are younger but don't have a clear, like there's no one here with a clear path to the NHL on their whole team, which is what typical Final Four AHL teams are like. They're generally guys that are going to play AHL hockey and are AHL veterans. And that's what Laval's up against here. Like Rochester had a fair amount of youth on it. Like the Sabres have some prospects on there, more than Charlotte does for sure. So that's why, to me, this is the reality of the AHL coming home to roost on Laval. Like they were bucking what's been a long-standing trend in the AHL, where young teams with actual NHL prospects rarely have any success in the AHL playoffs. It's pretty rare. They're usually veteran battle-hardened AHL teams with AHL players who don't really have that future. There's obviously exceptions. Back when John Cooper was coaching in the minors for Tampa's, affiliate, which was in Syracuse at the time, or Norfolk. It was Norfolk.
I think it was Norfolk, yeah.
They went on that epic winning streak that year, whatever, but they had like Palat and Killorn and Tyler Johnson and all these guys that eventually played for Tampa. And that's what the Canadiens are trying to recreate with Laval now. But that's an outlier. That doesn't happen that often, and so I think it's a good test. It's another good test for their young guys, especially with Witherspoon and Trudeau out, as you mentioned. Is the young guys on defense are three of the more promising prospects on that team, and Reinbacher, Mailloux, and Engstrom.
Engstrom is the one who was probably taking the most of this opportunity so far.
Yeah.
Of the three guys, he's the one that stands out the most just by his skating ability with the puck. He's the most dynamic defenseman they got.
He was in game one. There was a time when there was one moment on the power play where he picked up the puck behind his own net and just started skating up the wing with it. You would think he'd like do a drop pass or something. They were on a power play, and he just single-handedly did his own entry by himself, like just skated it into the zone. It's like, yeah, he's looking really dynamic. And I think Reinbacher's been a little less noticeable, but I think he's been fine, like not standing out, but fine. But these are valuable reps for him, valuable reps for Mailloux. The ultimate goal for this Laval Rocket postseason has largely been achieved. Obviously they want to go to the final. They want to compete for a Calder Cup, but what they wanted to get out of this Laval Rocket playoff run, they're getting that. And this is a valuable lesson that they're getting in this series against a tough, and you mentioned it after the game, but I thought after game one when Pascal mentioned Charlotte's collective hockey IQ, their team hockey IQ, I thought that was hockey sense or hockey sense. I think that was, that's a team much like their parent club, Florida, that plays a style, and they're going to play it, and they're going to be in your face, and they're not going to apologize for it, and they're going to hit you, and they're going to get you angry. And you got to deal with that. Yeah,
absolutely. So, Logan Mailloux, for those who have not followed too closely, so on Thursday, so he made a boo-boo on a zone entry during a power play, and it led to another shorthanded goal for the Checkers. They're up to 5 shorthanded goals in the playoffs. They have 2 power play goals. They're more dangerous when they're defending. They're more dangerous on the PK than on the power play. It's pretty crazy. But he didn't play in the third period, and Pascal Vincent said that he was hurt, but he remained on the bench. Managed to get a 10-minute misconduct while being on the bench. So he didn't touch the ice, so he just left at some point to the room with only like 3 or 4 minutes left, probably yapping a bit too much. But that was something. So it's interesting because Logan Mailloux and his coach were both in agreement that only a few days ago, 10 days or so ago, that he was playing the best hockey of his season, right at that time. And then you got this poor performance against Rochester in Game 4, then a Game 5 where he really just plays really within his limits, tries to be as discreet as possible. And then you got those first 2 games against Charlotte that don't go his way either. So it seems as though since the day that he said, I'm playing my best hockey, things have gone south for him. So luckily, the whole team is going south to Charlotte, North Carolina now. And maybe that he has a chance to redeem himself a bit, but it's an interesting challenge for Mailloux because he's got plenty of minutes at his disposal. He can still be an impactful quarterback on the power play, but in the third period, he had been replaced by Engstrom yesterday. So I'm curious to see how he's going to rebound from this, because he was really on the cusp of figuring certain things out, and it just like the rest of the team sort of slipped away these last few games. So
yeah, again, I mean that's just one example. Like I think there's a lot of learning that's going to happen with this team over these 3 games in Charlotte, where the administration's going to they're going to get a better sense of the character of some of their prospects that they're hoping will make the jump to the Canadiens, if not next year, then the year after. But there's a bunch of them that need to respond in a difficult situation, and their ability to do so, I think, is going to be closely watched for sure, whether they win or lose.
I'm sure that we're going to have a chance to discuss the Rocket again, maybe in the next few episodes. But we would like to close the show by tipping our hats. Is it tipping your cap or dipping your hat, or both?
Both apply. Both apply. I'm wearing a cap, so I can tip it.
Tip it. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
because François Gagnon, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, was the named recipient of the Elmer Ferguson Memorial Award. That's pretty neat. The Hall of Fame mentioned that. The Hall of Fame quoted Frank Saravalli, who's the head of our Professional Hockey Writers Association. And Frank says, for more than 3 decades, François Gagnon has been hockey's voice of reason in French Canada. So, yeah, so you're okay. Well, François is the first voice that Hockey Man Montreal clicks in the morning, because he's unafraid to write the controversial opinion or story and unflappable in his service to readers. More than that, François is universally respected by his peers, players, and executives for his honesty and dedication to his craft. Man, I'm so happy for him. He was my mentor, right? When I started on the beat at La Presse, I was working with Frankie.
Yeah.
So he was like the senior beat writer for La Presse, and he took me under his wing. So we covered the Canadiens together for a few years. And it was a lot of fun, but the media environment in Montreal, because of the French aspect, is a little bubble, right? It's almost condemned to be regional, whereas and to be recognized throughout the league. It's one thing to be respected and be followed and be listened to or read within Quebec, but to have the quality of your work recognized throughout the league, that's something else entirely. And I think of Jacques Doucet, who was the play-by-play of the Montreal Expos, legendary broadcaster. Everybody in Quebec who would listen to the Expos games on French radio, they would go to sleep at night with the voice of Jacques Doucet. He was really, really significant. But for some reason, even though he was fully deserving of entering the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, he was never voted in with the Ford Frick Award, because that understanding of the quality of his work never burst entirely the bubble of what it is within, the Quebec media environment. And when a guy like François...
French Canada in his case, because he was broadcast in New Brunswick and in Eastern Ontario, and there was a lot of... Jacques covered a wider berth for this.
That's true. But François Gagnon was able to really have an influence throughout the league, so it's not an easy thing to do. So it's that's really what seems to me the most significant here.
Yeah, and it's right. I think Marc Defoy was the last Francophone writer, or was it Yvon Pedneau? No, I think Marc Defoy was the last one. So it's been a while. He got it quite a long time ago. And it's such a such an important market to the league historically, currently, that it should be recognized on a regular basis. The people who really drive the conversation in this market, François definitely drove the conversation in this market for many, many years, still does today. Uh, a great deal, both in print and obviously on television. What's so admirable about François is that honestly, like if he went to RDS and said, you know what, I don't feel like writing anymore, they'd be like, okay, no big deal. Just come on TV and talk and that'll be fine.
Yeah.
But he does it because he loves it and because it's so important to him. And it's such a part of who he is that's why he continues writing as often as he does. I'm sure RDS would want him to write occasionally, but the frequency and the cadence with which he provides written content on the website is purely out of his own passion for the written word. And Frankie actually had a big influence on my career as well. You talk about him mentoring you and taking you under your wing at La Presse. I have a very distinct memory of François Gagnon from the 2002 playoffs. The Canadiens were facing the Boston Bruins. And if you'll remember, that's the series where Kyle McLaren clotheslined Richard Zednik in the middle of the series. And so Robbie Ftorek, exceptionally for that game, because I think he had been doing his scrums out by the visitors' room, but for that game, they brought him into the press conference room because it was such a demand to talk to him because Richard Zednik was the top scorer on the Canadiens that year, was a very important offensive player. And so someone I don't remember if it was Frankie, but I think it was someone else, asked Ftorek after the game, like, can you, what did you think of the hit that Kyle McLaren put on Richard Zednik, whatever? He's like, I'm not going to comment on that. Next question was Frankie, and I can't remember if he asked the first one or if he asked and then asked a follow-up or if he was the next question. He said, excuse me, Robbie, with all due respect, you have to answer that question. Your player just took out the best player on the Montreal Canadiens. There's no way you can stand there and not answer the question. And Robbie Ftorek was like, what? Like, I mean, you could just see it on his face. He was like, he was stunned and he just kind of like mumbled like, yeah, no comment. But it was like, that's Frankie, like he was just like, no, you cannot stand up
bullshit
there.
Guy.
That's it. You cannot stand up there and not comment on this. It's what everyone's talking about. You need to say something. You need to answer for what your player did. That's Frankie Gagnon. And that was my second year covering the Canadiens. I still wasn't like a beat writer or anything, but I was covering that game for Canadian Press. And I was just like I couldn't fathom doing that. I was still somewhat intimidated by the environment. I was very young and I looked at that and I was like, yeah, that's how you got to do it, And so that was in 2002. This is 23 years later and Frankie's still that way, still holds people to account, still sharp in his analysis, still gets the crux of what matters in a game and what doesn't. So yeah, extremely happy to see him be rewarded. It's much deserved. It's very well deserved. Great guy.
And it's never, when he asks questions like that, it's never to put the person in a bad spot, or it's not gotcha journalism or anything. It's like, it's just, seeing through the bullshit and just asking what's clear cut, what needs to be asked and what needs to be said, because he's identified what's important. And it needs a level of comfort, but also the thing is that the reputation that he's earned and the credibility that he's earned over the years makes it so that in the way that he asks questions, he let the other person know that he understands what's happening. He understands the context, and there's nothing gratuitous in what he's about to ask. He'll give the additional detail around just to let the other person know, I know exactly what happened. So don't try to go and sell us something that's really not the real thing. Tell us truly what happened or what you think, and that honesty and that clear cut line of questioning is healthy, and it's a lost art to a certain extent.
It is. So, félicitations, François. We couldn't be happier for you. I can't wait to see your plaque in the Hall of Fame. That's going to be a great day. Yeah.
All right. On that note, we'll wish you a good weekend, everybody, and we'll be back on Monday for another episode of the BasuandGodin Notebook.